philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Hey, welcome to the Think Grow podcast. This is Ruben Chavez, and I'm your host. I'm pretty pumped today. I really want to talk to you about something that has been on my mind for quite some time now. And it's an idea that many people have talked about in many different ways. In fact, I've come to believe that it is really kind of at the root of all personal development and what you might call spirituality. Even it's the principle that lies at the bottom of all of this, and it's in Buddhism. It's called acceptance. In personal development, sometimes it's referred to as emotional fitness. In psychology, it's called psychological flexibility. Nietzsche called it amor fati. The Christians kind of refer to it as surrendering in some sense. And you can see that these are all kind of pointing to the same thing. And what it is the ability to engage with reality as it is. And that may sound simple, that may sound overly simplified, but in fact, it is a rather deep and nuanced concept. I'll try to unpack that here in this episode, and in subsequent episodes, because I think it's actually the only thing that we need to talk about in terms of what you might call personal development or personal growth, or just actualizing who we are as individuals. And it's a realization I came to very recently. I've known it intellectually, but I recently just kind of downloaded this truth into my nervous system after several months with depression and experiencing really heavy negative emotions. I just kind of realized through researching through my book and through meditation and through various other ways, it just kind of came together for me that this is the principle that everyone's talking about, and few are explicitly articulating what it is that comprises this principle. So I want to kind of unpack that here for you, because I really feel like I have a new lease on life in some ways. I know that sounds cheesy, but I really feel very, very invigorated and very clear about what it is that needs to be talked about, what my book is going to deal with, and the kind of issues that people are facing. So I'll kind of try to talk about that here. I'm going to talk around it a little bit because it's difficult to put into words in a sentence, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible here. Look, the idea that we need to engage with reality as it is on its face very, very simple. Ultimately, that's kind of what we're all trying to do, right? We're all living in the world, and we all are just trying to deal with the reality that we have in front of us. And virtually everything that's not a hard science, like everything apart from like protons and neutrons and, the scientific categories, is basically dealing with how we live or how we should live. Like, how we deal with reality or how we should deal with reality. That's what the humanities are. That's what literature is. That's what stories tell us. That's what personal development is. That's what anthropology is in many ways. And so this is the eternal question, how to be in the world. I think the concept that's at the center of that is this idea of acceptance, being able to engage with reality as it is, to interact with the moment as it presents itself. And central to that ability, central to that skill is actually a deeper skill, which is, I guess if I had to sum it up in a sentence, it would be something like the willingness to face uncomfortable emotions and unpleasantness more generally is the path to inner peace. That really is kind of one of the deeper truths of life, I think. And again, I'm not unfortunately not the first one to point this out or to discover this. The the Buddhists and the Stoics and many other wisdom traditions have long since talked about this in various ways, but I do want to give you my take on it. So, first of all, you might think, well, wow, that's really unglamorous. The ability to experience discomfort. Yeah, it is. It's not on its face, it doesn't seem super fun or sexy, but I really think this is the most important skill we can develop. Why is that? Well, firstly, I think it's because virtually everything that is meaningful or valuable in life requires that we experience discomfort initially. And so, it's kind of built into the structure of existence. If we want to pursue a new career, let's say, that's going to come with its share of uncertainty, and there's discomfort associated with that. If we want to raise a family, that's certainly not comfortable. It's mentally exhausting, as I can tell you firsthand, and physically demanding too. But so there's discomfort there too. If you want to develop meaningful and deep relationships, be prepared to face the discomfort of vulnerability. If you want to get in shape, that's going to require physical discomfort, and on and on and on. Unpleasantness in all its forms really is kind of the baseline condition of life. And it's useful to know that, because then you can prepare for it. As the Buddhists said, life is unsatisfactoriness. Sometimes it's translated as life is suffering, but I think the word is dukkha in Pali, and that, as far as I know, is more accurately translated as unsatisfactoriness. And so one way to conceptualize personal development, the field of personal development, whatever that entails, because that's a very broad category, and even spirituality, I would say, because I actually think that the logical endpoint of what we call personal development is kind of the spiritual path. And so I think a way to conceptualize these things is it's basically, it's not a way to make our outer conditions more perfect or trying to hack our lives in a way that our circumstances are just always good and there's no obstacles in our way. That's not really what it's about. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's taken an internal approach, and it's about developing ourselves in such a way that we can deal with whatever circumstances we happen to encounter. This kind of maps onto this Buddhist idea, which is that you might think the world is, or you might think like the outside is very dangerous. There's a lot of sharp edges, there's rocks, there's cacti that you might step on. And so you might think, well, I have to cover everything with leather. And Shantideva, this Buddhist scholar, he says, no, actually, a much more effective method would not be to cover the world with leather, but rather to cover your feet with shoes. And that's the same idea. It's not about making everything outside of you perfect. It's about developing yourself in order to give you the traits necessary to deal with whatever it is that you happen to step on or encounter in your daily life. And so you might say, well, how do we do this? And the answer is very simple. It's through practice. We teach our brains how to respond to situations. And so a lot of us, we have this idea, and this is a very common conception about life, that we should feel good most of the time, and that we should, things should be fairly easy, or that what we get in our daily lives should respond to our desires. And this idea has been perpetuated by the culture that we live in many ways, but it really makes us very fragile. And the reason is because when we then encounter a situation or an emotion that we deem unpleasant, we turn away from it. And in psychology, this is called experiential avoidance. So we avoid our experience. When we encounter someone that maybe we've had a disagreement with, we try to avoid them. We don't make eye contact. When we feel some kind of vulnerability about a situation, we instead numb out with TV or with alcohol or drugs. We're always tending to avoid the discomfort and the unpleasantness of life rather than facing it. And the problem with that, there's a very simple technical problem with that, is that when we do avoid our experience, we teach our brain that whatever it is we're avoiding is bad and that we should avoid it. And so the feedback loop continues on, and we actually get more scared and more averse to the thing we're avoiding as time goes on, because as we avoid it, we get the satisfaction and the temporary relief that comes from not having to deal with that discomfort. And then our brain goes, oh, okay, well, that kept you safe, so let's continue that pattern of behavior. And so the next time you encounter the uncomfortable situation, that's how your brain responds. And that neural pathway gets even more ingrained and becomes stronger. And so, taken to its logical extreme, you could end up with a condition like agoraphobia, where you're basically scared of everything. Now, obviously, not everyone goes that far, but that's what happens when we avoid things, is we become more scared of them and we become unable to deal with circumstances, and our world shrinks in effect. So the way that we counteract this problem is by doing the exact opposite. When we encounter something that threatens our peace, when we encounter something that stands in the way of us living our values, when we encounter something that scares us, especially if it's something that is standing in the way of us kind of living our best life and being true to ourselves, we don't avoid it. We face it. We voluntarily confront it. That's kind of the central motif of human existence, I would say, because it's a motif that appears in virtually all of the stories that we tell ourselves and that we've created over the millennia, and certainly central to all the hero stories. It's the hero who confronts the thing that threatens the community, and in the process transforms himself and brings order back to the community. And you're doing that every moment in your life. There are many, many, many opportunities to do this in your daily practice. So you're going about your life and you encounter an uncomfortable situation. Let's say it's a conversation with someone that's starting to get a little bit heated. Maybe it's your significant other that you're arguing with. Well, you could avoid that and you could retreat to another room, or maybe not even physically avoid it. You could avoid it emotionally by pretending that everything is okay. And when you do that, this is the most important point. This is one of the more important points here. When you avoid uncomfortable emotions or situations, they don't go away. They actually go into hiding, and they fester, and they become worse and more uncomfortable and messier. And so the thing is that they're going to be experienced one way or another. Your emotions, just because you neglected them, doesn't mean that they're going to not need to be felt. You're still going to need to feel them, and with interest later on. And this is kind of the idea of repressing your emotions and repressing uncomfortable feelings, is that not only will you need to feel them later, but you'll need to feel them all at once, and you'll need to feel them with interest, meaning they will come back with a vengeance. And that's not good. It's not fun. This is something that I've dealt with in my life, which is not giving my emotions the attention they deserve. Emotions are kind of like newborn babies, in that if they're crying out for attention, they want to be acknowledged, they want to be attended to, and they need to be attended to, in fact. And if you don't, they will cry more, and they will get furious, and it will be an even more unpleasant situation. So the idea then is to deal with the emotions, process the emotions as they come up, and not save it for later when it will actually be a worse situation that you're dealing with. I want to take a brief moment to talk about one of our sponsors for this show, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 classes in pretty much any field you can think of. Writing, photography, cooking, even social media marketing, just to name a few. One of the many reasons that I love and promote Skillshare is because their core values of learning and growing are very much in alignment with my own, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, with yours too. I'll tell you about one of my favorite classes that I've ever taken with Skillshare. It was a productivity masterclass, and it was all about creating systems in your life and business. And it was taught by this pretty well-known YouTuber, and it completely changed how Vanessa and I run our business. It helped give us our time back by helping us to create systems that streamlined and organized our content creation and our editorial calendar for Think, Grow, Prosper. Massively, massively helpful. And here's the cool news. Right now, Skillshare is offering listeners of the Think, Grow podcast 2 months free, so you can try it out for yourself. Go to Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. You'll get unlimited access to 25,000 classes for a full 2 months at no cost. So it's basically a risk-free situation here. The specific URL that you want to visit for this offer is Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. Check it out. Join the millions of other students who are learning and growing with Skillshare. I've used it for a while. I love it. I think you will too. Again, that URL is Skillshare.com/thinkgrow. And now, back to the show. So you might think, well, this is really overwhelming. Like, I'm not ready to face my problems and insecurities and the situations that I've been avoiding. It's overwhelming. It's too much for me right now. And fair enough, because if you've been avoiding, the things you've been avoiding have been accumulating and growing, and so it may be you may be in a situation where what you need to do, and I found this very, very helpful in my own life, is break up the thing that you need to face into smaller, more manageable pieces. And so let's say you need to address a pile of paperwork that's been on your desk for the past 4 months. Well, you might start by opening one envelope and looking at it, or looking at one piece of paper. Maybe you don't take on the whole pile initially. Maybe you start with one document and you put it down and you do it for 2 minutes. Maybe you just look at it and you do it for 2 minutes and then you put it away. And then the next day, maybe you approach the pile of paperwork again and you open 2 envelopes and you look at it for 5 minutes. And what you're doing through this, it sounds silly, but if you start small, you give yourself wins early on. And that increases momentum and gets the ball rolling so that you can actually continue to do that. And it builds courage, actually. Years ago when I paid off, Vanessa and I, my wife and I, paid off all of our debt, we followed Dave Ramsey's baby steps. And it's a really smart plan because unlike most financial advisors and kind of money gurus, Dave Ramsey doesn't advise paying off the largest debts or even the debts with the most interest first. He doesn't advise that at all, even though mathematically that is the appropriate way to do it. That would be the most effective way to do it. And the reason is because we're not computers. We're human beings and we have a psychology. And so what Dave Ramsey advises is that you start with the very smallest debt you have first so that you can get those small wins and get that momentum going. You pay off a $500 credit card, maybe a $700 credit card, all of a sudden you're feeling pretty good. And then you put, maybe you take your $1,200 credit card and then you start paying toward that and you see progress. And when you see progress, it's much easier to keep going. So So this is one way to kind of start building courage. I'm really packing a lot into here. This is kind of you can think of this episode as a table of contents, or kind of like an introduction or overview of some of the ideas I want to unpack in much greater detail in the future. But for right now, I'm just kind of giving you an overview, kind of riffing on this idea from different angles, so that you can get a sense for where I'm at and for where I'd like to take this podcast and my content in general, both here and on my social media. I'll leave you with this. I want to wrap up here, but I'll leave you with this. Practicing these kind of baby steps of approaching the things that scare us or frighten us or disgust us or threaten us or cause us anxiety. Practicing these baby steps, ultimately what it does is it trains your brain to respond to those situations with courage rather than fear. And that's really useful because that expands your world, and that allows you and enables you to deal with a much broader range of circumstances. And, it goes back to that Buddhist concept of putting shoes on your feet rather than trying to wrap the world in leather. Okay, so here's one more very simple and practical approach for building your kind of courage muscles, let's call them. And this really has to do with your emotions. Ultimately, everything does come down to your emotions, because even if it's an external experience that you're having or some problem that you're perceiving that's outside of you that's causing your trouble, it's only causing trouble because the way that is being interpreted and the way that you're responding or reacting to that problem, it causes you unpleasant emotions, and that's what you are referring to as the problem. And so addressing that root problem of the emotions and dealing with them, processing them effectively is what it kind of all comes down to. So I'll leave you with this practical approach to effectively processing your emotions, let's say. And that is noticing how the emotions feel in your body as they course through your body. And this may sound silly for some of you, some may sound very obvious to others of you, but it's as crazy as it sounds. Until fairly recently, I didn't really realize that every emotion actually has a physical sensation attached to it. I mean, I guess I knew that on some level casually and, intellectually, but I didn't really know that in my body. I didn't really have that wisdom in me. I didn't have that knowledge in me. But this is a very important point. A lot of us are way too much in our heads and not enough in our bodies. At least I know I am. And, and especially if you're a more cerebral kind of a person or tend toward overthinking, that kind of stuff. You're living a lot in your head and possibly not enough in your body. And so when you notice that you're feeling an unpleasant emotion, you're just living your life. You don't have to go out and try to conjure up some situation. You can just try this at any point during the day, because you may notice that you feel unpleasant emotions throughout the day at various points. They may not be huge events, but maybe someone does something that annoys you and you react defensively. There are many reasons why it's useful to notice the sensations in your body, but one of them is because it immediately alerts you to the fact that you're actually observing your emotions. You are not the emotion itself. That's a very practical way to become the observer of the emotion and to detach yourself from the thoughts that you're having that may otherwise cause you to react. So you're not reacting from your emotions. You're actually looking at them from a more objective standpoint and then deciding how you're going to respond. But it does begin with noticing the physical sensations that you're feeling. So pause for a moment when you start to maybe get angry and just be still and notice how it feels in your body. Does your face get hot? Does your chest tighten up? What about when you get anxious? Maybe you don't even have the labels for the emotions yet, because I've actually been working on building my emotional vocabulary because it's not something that comes supernatural for me. But let's just say even if you don't have the emotional vocabulary, you can identify there's something unpleasant coming up. How does it feel? In Buddhism, there's this idea of inviting your kind of demons to sit with you for tea, and they refer to the unpleasant experiences and the negative aspects of existence as Mara. And the idea is you invite Mara for tea. And that's akin to this same idea that I'm talking about here, which is inviting in and allowing your emotions to be there. Because the opposite approach, which is ignoring or repressing them or fighting against them, worsens the situation. It's a bit like quicksand. When you struggle and fight against it, you get sucked down even deeper into the hole. But if you stop and just kind of allow yourself to be there. By the way, I've never actually been in quicksand, just as a disclaimer, but I'm told that if you allow yourself to kind of just float there and lay flat, you won't continue to get sucked down. And so it is with emotions. Like, stop, let them be there, allow them to be there. This requires the ability to experience discomfort, and it requires the expectation that you will feel unpleasantness, and it's actually okay. I guess if there's one statement that I want to leave you with, it's that feeling unpleasant emotions or sensations doesn't say anything about you as a person. It actually doesn't mean that you're bad, that the situation is bad necessarily. It just means you're feeling an unpleasant emotion. And if you can just develop the ability to let that unpleasant emotion be there for just a short time. By the way, I think the research says that negative emotions usually last anywhere from about 60 to 90 seconds. So if you can just allow that emotion to run its course through your body, get curious about how it feels, observe it, rather than react to it immediately, you'll be on the path to inner peace. And it does take practice, but it's probably the most useful skill you will ever develop. Hey, thanks for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes on my website at thinkgrowprosper.com/podcast. That's where I put all the links and resources mentioned in each episode. It's also where I put the outlines of topics covered, which is a really good way to refer back to episodes in the future. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to leave a review on iTunes with your biggest takeaway. I make it a point to read all the reviews. You can also screenshot this episode and share it to your social media along with something you learned or found interesting. And tag me in your post because I'd love to see what you found interesting. Say hi and thank you for your support.